Before we dive into today's episode, I want to invite you to consider attending the Hope Restored Trauma Intensive, happening September 12th to 15th in Kissimmee, Florida. If you are looking for a safe space to share your hard story, where you will be seen and heard, if you need help working through your past or present day trauma, if you want to be in a community where women will hold space for your pain and point you to Jesus and his healing grace, this intensive might be for you. Ann Simmons, Brenda Stewart, and I have partnered to bring you a weekend of spiritual encouragement, deep work, biblical teaching, and clinical practices. We have limited the intensive to a small, intimate gathering, so sign up as soon as possible. Learn more by clicking the link in the show notes. Now for today's episode. Have you ever wanted to hear from God? Like you just want to hear his voice. You want to hear him speak to you. If so, you will really enjoy today's conversation with Marnie Hammar, because she talks not only about speaking to God, but hearing from him. Hi, friend. You're listening to Find Hope Here. I'm your host, Teresa Whiting, author, speaker, ministry leader, friend, and fellow struggler. This is a podcast about the messy, complicated, painful parts of life, but also the beautiful, joy-filled hope that Jesus promises. Each week, we dig deep into God's Word together and talk about how his truth impacts our everyday lives. I'm not going to ask you to sit with me and have coffee because I seem to have my best conversations while I'm just doing life. So I'd love to hang out with you as you walk or fold laundry or drive to work. You're invited to join me in pursuing the hope God promises. No matter where you are or where you've been, I pray you always find hope here. Let's jump into today's episode. Welcome, friends, to Find Hope Here. I'm so excited to introduce my friend Marnie Hammar to you today. Before Marnie had kids, she earned her MS from the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern University, and she worked in communications in the corporate world at Harvard University and Babson College. She is a regular contributor to numerous outlets like She Reads Truth, Family Christian, the Joyful Life magazine, Revelation Wellness, and Fathom magazine. You can connect with Marnie on Facebook and Instagram, and I will have all the links in the show notes. But welcome, Marnie. Thanks for being here. Will you tell the listeners a little bit more about yourself?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's a joy. So a little about me. I am sitting in, East Side Cincinnati, and I am waiting for the arrival of my very loud boys coming home from school. The family life is loud and full over here, Teresa.
Yeah, tell us about your family.
So I have a college freshman. He just came back after finishing his first year at Ohio State, and it is so good to have him home. And he is pre-summer job employment, so we are milking it and having him do all the things for us. And then I have a sophomore, and I suppose in a week and a half, he will very vehemently object to me calling him a sophomore because he will be a junior. Yep. And then I have a 7th grader, and our lives are pretty full with sports. They all three have been faithful to participate in lots of fun things, especially soccer. And my youngest actually has rejected soccer. He pursued his own thing in picking up golf. And it's been an adjustment for me, a loud laugher, to go from cheering at soccer to cheering at golf.
Right. Yes. And it's 3 boys, right? So you're
all
a boy mama.
Boys.
Yep.
All boys. They are so fun. Yeah.
Awesome.
So that's a little about me.
Awesome. Do you have a fun fact about yourself?
I'll just build on something I just said. I have gotten in trouble for my loud laugh. There's a fun fact. Yeah, it just kind of comes out, and Yeah, this is a story people don't know. So I will tell you, it's very short. I was, I loved being able to go to visit. We had tickets to a show that was kind of an 80s show. So it was 80s music. And in the intro, they were like, this show is supposed to be fun. If you want to get up and dance in the aisles, go ahead. And so, I mean, we didn't do that, but I was laughing pretty loudly because it was hilarious and I was enjoying the show. And at the end of the show, the woman in front of me stood up, turned around, and she said, "You ruined that show with your cackle." And
Oh, what a grouch.
so I told my boys that when we got home because I was like, "Oh my goodness." And they were like, "Mom, you do laugh loud. I could hear you from one of my friends down the street when you were in her driveway." So there you go.
All
Loud
right.
laugh showing up.
Well, that just shows the joy that you have.
Yeah, there you go. We'll go with that.
Well, while we're on the theme of being loud, you
Yes,
actually have a series that you created called the Hear Him Louder series. And
that's a
this is what you
good
say.
segue.
This is what you say on your website. You say, may this series be an invitation to listen for his voice together. And what I would love to do, Marnie, because we're in a soul care series right now, and we've been talking a lot about what does it mean to nurture our souls. And I think for many of us, prayer is often a one-sided conversation. We're talking to God, we're reading God's word, but we're not tuning in and actually listening to him. And I know
Yeah.
that's a passion of your heart. So tell us a little bit about your own story. Like what led to this Hear Him Louder series, and why are you passionate about helping women hear God's voice?
Wow, that's so good. Um, One of my first thoughts as you were kind of talking about that soul care emphasis is that in my own experience, prayer is soul care when I'm listening, right? Because if it's one sided and I'm just lamenting, which I do really well, um, anyone else?
Mm-hmm.
But if I haven't held space to sit and be still with Jesus, then I miss out on having him minister to my heart. And that is the soul care that prayer brings. So, my own story, and the reason this is, I would say it's just knit into my heart. This is just something that I am constantly um, aware of seeking him. And it's because for so long I didn't know that he still speaks to our hearts. I kind of missed it in my own walk. And there were, um, my my love for Jesus goes way, 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 way back. Like it wasn't that I didn't love him. I remember praying him into my heart, and I remember where I was. I was sitting on my parents' bed, and I mean, I remember everything about it. I was 5, maybe 6. I was so young. I have loved Jesus for a really long time, but I missed out on knowing him. And I think that part of that was missing out on the sitting with him and the pressing into knowing who he is. I knew about him. I knew the
Mm.
stories, right? I grew up in church and loved all the stories. Do you remember flannel boards?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah. And youth group. And I mean, all the amazing things that I have such fond memories of. But I missed knowing who he is and I missed meeting with him. I just didn't know. And I I mean, some people learn this without a hard season, but that wasn't my story. My husband and I experienced a hard season in our marriage. And in doing our faith the way we had done it, I mean, we were volunteering as a couple with the youth group at our senior high when we were um, right before the season. And I mean, we were actively attending church, we were in a small group. It was shocking to us that we so desperately felt that we needed him. Like we fell into this hard season and we were like, whoa, we thought we had this Jesus part figured out and we don't. We
Mm.
need him. And we found him because we were so broken. We were desperate in a new way to seek him. And it was in that season that I learned so unexpectedly that he speaks to our hearts. And it was through a series of um, just sweet God gifts that he just made himself known. And I woke up in a new way. I thought, my goodness, like I told you, I have known you, Jesus, for so long, but I didn't know this part. And it opened everything up. And I felt this burden then. Oh my goodness, how many other people don't know this, right? That
Right.
what they're living and how they're living their faith has been lovely and wonderful, and they love him, but there's more on the table,
Mm.
right? There's more. And so that is where the birth of this series began, because I think there's such power in creating, I would almost call this a community of women who have gathered around the same message, right? There's a power in sharing our story around truth and the truth of, I mean, the reality that he speaks to our hearts. But then we wrap our story around it and it brings it home and helps us see and be encouraged by others when maybe we're in a season of not understanding how to hear him or doubting that we can. And this series, it's been since what, 2021, so almost 3 years, 3.5 years actually. How many stories in that time can help us build up sort of this foundation of evidences of, look how many women are saying, yes, I've heard him in this everyday moment, or I've heard him through my quiet time and the word, and just compiling and gathering all these stories is an encouragement to our hearts to show, yes, yes, this can happen for me too.
Mm. There's probably a lot of listeners thinking, I want that. I want that. What she's talking about. And we're going to get into a little bit. What does that look like? What do you mean when you say you hear Jesus speak to your heart? But one of the things that when I read your story on your website, you said, for years, I was so used to trying to be perfect and rocking out my checklists that I accidentally carried that checklist mentality into how I lived my faith. And I'm just over here raising my hand saying, I identify with that. The checklist person, my faith is A, B, C, and D. And where is the intimacy with Jesus, the walking, the listening? Talk a little bit about that.
About sort of the coming out of the perfectionism.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Okay. So I wrote a piece recently about perfectionism, and when I was writing it, I thought through, like, when did this start for me? Like, where did this even come from? Because I mean, it goes back so far. It was so deeply entrenched, and I think our culture demands so much of us, right? And we see perfection in our scroll. We see perfection in media. We see like we I don't know, we're just told what perfection is, and then we strive to try to fit it into our lives, and we want that, right? And for me, I think it started in first grade, which goes a
Mm.
that's a big old time.
Yes.
And and this is so ironic because I attended a Christian school just for 1 year in first grade. And at the award ceremony at the end of the year, I received this ribbon. And the ribbon was for the most 100s for that year. And we did these pace books. I can still remember them. They were these workbooks, and we would just kind of go through them and finish them and then take a test. And, it showed we learned the things, right? And so apparently I had a lot of 100s. Now,
Mm-hmm.
first of all, and second of all, and third of all, like, there's so many things wrong with that story. I mean, why did that award exist? And that's so sad that it was at a Christian school. And I mean, striving. And I was 5 or 6, and I'm thinking about the work these seniors were doing. And here comes this little first grader getting this ribbon. I don't know, lots of things. But I think that's where it began for me, because I was rewarded for perfection. And I had this little moment and it felt lovely, right? Like I have a ribbon. And so I think that's where it started. And it's so interesting when you are rewarded for being perfect, then you just want to replicate that, right?
Yep.
You just want to keep
Yep.
doing it. It felt really good. And I can do this. It just takes some hard work. We can rock this out. And I just did that, right? I did that for a really long time. And then perfection didn't work. My husband and I ended up in a mess. I had tried perfection. I was rocking perfection. And wait, time out. It stopped working. So maybe there's something wrong with perfection, right? And so that was sort of that coming out time. And obviously, that's also the time that I just really met Jesus. And I realized he loves me in the broken, in the mess, when I've done literally nothing to earn it. And that was sort of that opening up.
Mm.
Perfection tells us that we have to do, and God just wants us to be. He invites us to just be with him. Perfection is about earning, and Jesus is about giving. I mean, there's just so many things about perfectionism that are just lies. They're myths. They get us caught up and confused. They're counterfeit.
So, Marnie, something you just said about how you were rocking out perfection and you found in your life that it didn't work. And it made me think of a time in my life, actually, where Greg and I were going through a really hard time. And I remember saying, like, not these exact words, but thinking like, I made a deal with you, God. Like, I'm going
Mm.
to do this and this and this, and you're going to bless me. And these kinds of things are not going to happen in my family. And then they were happening. And also, God was like, yeah, and I never shook on that. And this is not about you completing all the checklists so that I do what you want me to do. This is not how it works. And it was heart-wrenching, but also this time of amazing growth of me being like, okay, so if this isn't how it works, then what does it mean to know Jesus and to walk with him? And
Mhm.
you kind of talk about these different statements of what it does look like to walk with Jesus. And I want to read them out because I think that so many people can relate to these things. You say, we go from ritual and routine to real relationship. We go from doing things for God to being with him. We go from proving ourselves to resting in him. We go from striving and performing to his peace. And we go from complacency and boredom to connection and intimacy. And those are just, I mean, who wouldn't want to go from where we are to those things, to this real, deep, intimate relationship that's not a here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to check all this off and be a good Christian. Who wouldn't want to trade that in for, I have a relationship with the living God. I know him and he knows me, and we talk to each other and we love each other. And I'm getting chills. So you talk about this. Tell us about it, because I know that that is what you're passionate about.
Yeah, and it's funny because I visually, when you're saying those lists, I'm like, yes, we want to go from the left side to the right side, right? Like, there's all of these things that we get stuck in, and I think they are tied up in what you're describing. You're like, this was a handshake we made, right? I think we do expect when I check the boxes and I do the right things, then it's going to be comfortable and easy. And um, we just all live happily ever after. That's what we're supposed to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
But doing the right things doesn't change our hearts. And I think that's the difference. And that's the difference from the left side to the right side. And that's why complacency and boredom can come when we stay in ritual and routine and striving and performing. We're making it completely about us and what we're doing instead of about him and who he is. And that makes me want to cry because when we miss knowing him, we miss all those blessings, we miss understanding the goodness and kindness and how he is unfailing, even when those unexpected things happen. And so when we're sitting with him and we're being still with him and we're learning who he is, our faith grows because we know of the good that will wait beyond this stuff that's hard, in a way where when we're stuck in the checklist, then it does feel like an exchange and a transaction. I'm paying you for this and you're giving me this. And we miss out on this so much more. We miss out on that speaking into the deep places where we meet with him and hear his love and experience it. And those chills you just described, right? Like that's just, there's so much more on the right side.
Yes, yes. And so I feel like the listeners are saying yes and yes, and I want that. I want that freedom. I want to lean in and hear him. So let's get to the how. Like, how do you hear his voice? What give us some, not a checklist. We don't want
No
a checklist.
No.
But what does it
No.
look like in real life to hear from him?
So I think that the most important thing is when we can sit and know that he speaks, right? There is something that happens when we get past the doubt and the wondering and truly know without a doubt, yes, he will speak to me. He has spoken to, let's list the people in the Bible, right? If he is an unchanging God, then who he is to the people in the Bible that we know and love and read their stories and are encouraged by, same God for us. And so we can look to those as evidences, and we see in his word promises that he will speak to us.
Hey friends, I'm just going to interrupt this conversation and continue it next week. I hope you will come back to hear all of the other things that Marnie has to say about hearing him louder. Thanks for hanging out with me today on Find Hope Here. To find anything I mentioned on the episode, go to teresawhiting.com/listen. That's where you can find all the show notes. And remember to hit that subscribe button. If you want to go the extra mile and leave a review, that would be amazing and it would mean so much to me. I'd like to leave you with this prayer from Romans 15:13. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, so that by the power of the Holy Spirit, you may abound in hope.